Hello, we cannot see you, but we are so excited for you to be here for this very special evening with author Dave Bosset, who you should know as a Disney animator. I think worthy of the Disney legend title. I would say that, but he has been writing and producing some amazing books of late. And of course, Mr. Alan Coats. Alan, how are you this evening? You are also why aren't you a Disney legend by now? That's my question.
No, I'm not a Disney legend, but I wish I got the window on Main Street.
Well, Dave and I are going to start the petition, D23 2022, Alan Coats, Disney legend. Let's make it happen. Come on. And obviously, the subject of tonight's chat is this amazing book that Dave has written and Alan has championed for years. This is what my research has shown me. Years you have been working on this book about Claude Coats, and we are going to get into it. So, Ben, does it look like most of the people have filtered in from the waiting room now?
Yes.
Yes. Dave has made an amazing little video that I think is a great overview to start the presentation. So, Dave, do you want to cue that sucker up?
Yeah, let's get that going. Hold on 1 second. Let me get that. I'm going to share, and then I'm going to.
Looks good.
Claude, Julie Reams. She's Miss Disneyland Tencennial, and Claude is the Imagineer in charge of the Pirate Project. So will you explain what all this is about?
Well, we've been restaging this walking the plank scene, Walt. And with the shark circling below, we've got this fellow in a real precarious situation.
I feel quite sorry for your victim there.
Yes, he's in a bad way.
Thanks. I'm going to take Julie to the town.
Okay. Yeah, Walt always had a way of doing the usual in an unexpected way. And we always keep that in mind. We'd like to start on a foundation that doesn't lose our public, that they kind of know where they are. And yet we feel we must give them something beyond. At the end of that, they should feel have an experience that's a little bit unusual for them. Disneyland does have a lot of charm to it, and we feel it's possibly because it was such a high plateau to begin with. Now, from the early times that we didn't know much about what we were doing, we've had so much more experience, so many more people, and so many more minds have come around to help out and to show new ways of going. That we have now a great backlog of techniques and information to call upon.
I don't think that I ever worked with anybody who, when he was given an assignment, jumped in and got so many things going at the same time and with so many people, and was able to, in a very unique way, mobilize a lot of energy to pour into developing the way an audience would see an attraction.
It's quite an inspiration, but the most endearing and the most fun thing is when new animators or new people come in the company, and they'll walk by his office. They'll walk back and forth for a while, and they'll stick their head in my office and they'll go, "Do you think Claude Coats would talk to me? I was back in the morgue looking at all his old backgrounds. Do you think that I could show him some of my work?" And I always say how sweet he is. He takes his time and he'll talk to any new person that comes in. He's so special. And he doesn't even realize how special he is.
Amazing. Well, I thought we could start off by just talking about where this book came from, because I know it's a passion project for the both of you, but I am a little curious about how it kind of all started.
Well, really, it started about 5 years ago, and it was because I happened to really meet Alan at that point, and and actually, Drew, I should step back further because I met Claude Coats back in 1985. And it was 85, 86. And he retired, was it 87, Alan, or 89?
Dad retired in 89.
89. So I actually first met him, it would have been then in the latter part of 86. And I met him in the Imagineering commissary. And he was an incredibly gracious guy, really approachable. You know, I was just starting my career and he was really in the twilight of his career. I had the opportunity to chat with him in the mornings. We were both morning people. So I usually ran into him while I was getting some breakfast, and he always got a donut and black coffee in the commissary. So, you know, we'd sit and chat, you know, maybe once a week or twice a week, or, you know, a handful of times a month through his retirement. I mean, when, you know, he finally retired, and then about a year after that, he had passed away. And so you fast forward 35 years, and I was at a conference in Burbank, and I was going in to the ballroom, and Alan was coming towards me, and I didn't know him at that point. And he saw my name badge, and he said to me, "Hey, Dave Bosset, I just got your Dolly and Disney book at Barnes and Noble." And I was just thrilled that my book was at Barnes and Noble, and that this guy bought it. And I glanced down and I saw his name, Alan Coats, and he walked past me, and, you know, I went looking for him at the morning break, and he had gone home not feeling well. So a mutual friend of ours wound up putting us together via email. And I think it was like a month later, Alan and I met up at the Talleyrand in Burbank, and I had an opportunity to just sit for an hour and chat with him and tell him, you know, that I knew his father, and, you know, what a nice man he was to me and all of this. And I was such a fan of the work that Claude had done in backgrounds on some of the early Disney pictures, you know, like the wishing well sequence in Snow White, and you know, Geppetto's toy shop, you know, toy workshop in Pinocchio, and, you know, just the guy's an incredible, you know, incredible talent. And anyway, by the end of that lunch, Alan asked if I'd be interested in writing a book on Claude. And of course I said yes. I mean, why wouldn't I? You know, and it seemed like a no-brainer. We kind of were under the impression like, oh, this would be great. You know, we'll go pitch it, and they'll say, yes, we want to do this book, and we'll go off and do the book, and it'll get published. You know, ignorance is bliss. So, I mean, that's really how this whole book came out, and that was about 5 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, Alan, was this something that you'd wanted to do for even longer, kind of get your dad's story out there?
Well, yes, Dave came along just exactly the right time. A publisher had approached me about writing a book about my father's career in Imagineering, and I didn't want to write about my father. I thought it would be too close to the subject, you know what I'm saying? So I thought I need a third party. David, you're a third party. So and I approached my colleagues, historian friends, people that I'd worked with, and I put the word out that it's about time that there was a complete book about my father. He'd been on social media and in DVDs and on television and in other books, but there really needed to be one about him and his art and his vision, and working closely with Walt. So it was fortuosity, I think the Sherman brothers said, right, Dave? That he came along and said, well, let's do it together. And it just went from there and worked out very well.
Well, I know we were talking a little bit beforehand, but did it surprise you that Disney itself didn't want to put this out, or were maybe unwilling to put it out, or whatever? I mean,
it was to me. I mean, honestly, I've said this sort of privately, and I don't mind saying it here. I just feel like if you've had an employee at your company who worked for more than half a century and is responsible for some of the most iconic attractions and some of the most legendary backgrounds in the animated films, and you sit there and say, we don't want to do a book on him because nobody knows who he is.
Right.
That's just sort of like, really, are you kidding me? Because I just feel like, just for the mere fact that the guy worked at the company for 54.5 years, they should have just said, yes, we're doing a book on him. That's
Right.
all.
Right.
Forget about it. Forget about any, who the audience is going to be and all of that. Just say yes, because this guy created and was a principal involved in some of the most incredible theme park attractions, and one of the original guys that helped invent themed entertainment at the Walt
Yes.
Disney Company.
Well, I think that's one of the more fascinating aspects of the book, is the kind of seeing how Imagineering was founded, because it's not like there are no generational Imagineers. They were part of this inaugural batch. And was that part of the appeal for you, Dave, and also Alan, for getting the story out? And I know that Tom Morris has been doing some work on this too, but just sort of illuminating those initial Imagineers and how they kind of came into that space.
Well, Alan and I had a number of long conversations about, Claude's career, and how do you cover somebody who's had such a varied and lengthy career? You can't really do justice in one book.
Right.
And so in those conversations, Alan and I, talked about, the first 20 years, 1935 to 1955, Claude was in the, in the animation department. He was a color stylist. He was, a background painter. He was, just one of the guys that helped establish the look of the animated films that he was working on. And then he becomes this Imagineer, and he's part of the team that's really building Disneyland. That first 15 years is sort of a seminal period for Disneyland, because a lot of those major attractions are going in that will essentially last and survive the test of time. Pirates and Haunted Mansion, and, the Sub Voyage, and Alice in Wonderland, and Toad, and Peter Pan, and Snow White, all of these attractions that Claude had his hand in. And then, when you go past that 15 years of Disneyland, then you got this third, really, I think focused career, where Claude is now translating a lot of the attractions he helped to create at Disneyland. He's translating those down at Disney World, and he's got Alan, his son, who's now an Imagineer, by his side, and Alan's working with his father. And then, Claude does Walt Disney World, he does Epcot, he does Paris Disneyland, he does work on Paris, and
Tokyo too, right?
And then Tokyo,
Yes.
his last project before he retired was for Tokyo Disneyland.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. You get this firsthand experience of what it was like to be an Imagineer, literally painting sets at this, like the things that you painted in a movie, now you're painting in sort of three-dimensional life, which I think was really fascinating. And maybe Alan, you can speak to that kind of element of translation from the 2D medium to the 3D medium with this new sort of endeavor.
Yeah, you got it, Drew. I mean, it was very much hands-on. I always see Dad in a hard hat, because he wanted to be on site and actually, helping to create it himself. And that's what he did. Certainly with Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, his first attraction there, he was right in there painting the flats and creating the black light look of that attraction as the park was getting ready to open, and Walt needed his help. So he did have the Disney look, the Disney look, as Dave said. And he was able to translate his animated work directly into environmental immersive attractions. And that's what he was doing from the very, very beginning.
Well, What was there something that either of you found while doing the research for this book that really surprised you sort of about those early days of Imagineering?
What surprised me the most, I think, was the technology that Dad was able to understand and utilize and incorporate into the attractions. The first thing he would ask Mapo, who was the manufacturing arm of WED, he'd say, "What's the radius of the ride vehicle or the boat or the hanging suspension that I have? How do I tell the story in the best way in the space that I have?" Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, for instance, was so tiny that the turns that vehicle made, where the twisting was so sharp and so tight, he had to figure out how to ribbon, that was the technical word. How do you ribbon the track through a small space and tell the story and give a finale before you leave the attraction, go up back into the sunlight. So he was able to envision how to put something in a space. He thought spatially, he thought dimensionally, and he was able to tell a story within the space that was given to him to work in.
Well, did he feel sort of liberated by the kind of expanse of something like Pirates of the Caribbean, which is just the biggest, longest ride, still that they've done?
Well, I'd say, of course, obviously that's true. That was compared to what he'd been working in before, the space was huge.
Right.
And that was the first show building that Walt said, we have to go outside the berm of the railroad berm because we can't tell this story in the original confines where it was meant to be, which was in the basement, really, of New Orleans Square.
Right.
And Dave tells a good story. What impresses him the most in the Pirates, I think, that reveal effect.
It really is
utilized so well.
It's probably,
tell us, Dave.
Yeah, it's probably one of the greatest reveals in any attraction, as far as I'm concerned, because here you are, you get into a boat, the ride vehicle on Pirates, and you go through the banjo picking of the bayou, and then you go down that waterfall, and then down the second waterfall, and now you're in the grotto. And the grotto, with all those tableaus of skeletal remains of, pirates and their booty and all of that. And it's sort of getting you into the mood, but you're also in this very enclosed and almost claustrophobic caverns as you're going through. And when you come to the end of that portion of the attraction, you come out into this massive show building where there's a Spanish galleon off to one side, the pirate ship, is off to the one side, firing cannonballs at the Spanish town. And I mean, it's breathtaking to me. It's absolutely breathtaking.
Right.
And I don't, I sit there and I marvel at it every time I go on that ride, because it's really one of my favorite attractions at all the parks.
Well, I probably should have asked this before, but after doing all this research and Alan obviously living with him for so many years and knowing him and working alongside of him, how would you kind of distill Claude Coats into, one or two sentences in terms of what kind of Imagineer he was? Mark Davis is very much kind of identified by his sense of humor and caricature. And, there are other, Joe Rohde is very interested in the kind of natural world, but how would you kind of distill Claude's essence into kind of like what kind of Imagineer was he?
Well, that's tough. That's a tough one.
I know it's a tough one, but Alan, anybody should do it. It's you, baby. Come on.
Well, he was a team player and I was there, but I didn't work that closely with him all the time. We worked together and did our job, and we did what we had to do. And Dad was a leader. He was low-keyed. He was very approachable. He was always on site. He was, as I said, he would spend more time in the model shop than he did in his office. He wanted to be where he could see things start to happen dimensionally, and he could see the space he had to work with. And Walt liked that too. He liked he could look at a rendering or a storyboard or sketches and that sort of thing. But Dad liked to say, here's the model, Walt. Here's what we're going to be using for this attraction. And Walt liked to see the dimension immediately, and he got it right away. So Dad had a dynamic with Walt that's important. I think we explained that in the book too.
Right.
And so you know, he played the game pretty well, I think. And he was very open to younger people and to helping anyone he could. He put everything down. If someone put their head in his office and asked him a question, he'd never say, wait, I'm too busy, come back later. That wasn't Claude Coats. It was always, I'll talk to you right now. Sure, come on in. Let me show you what I'm working on. What do you need?
Right.
And I experienced that firsthand when I first met him in the commissary.
What did he show? Do you remember what he showed you, or did he tell you what he was working on or anything?
No, it was just, you know, it was one of those things where there was just two of us standing there waiting for our breakfast. And, you know, I kind of knew who he was. And so I broke the ice by saying, excuse me, are you Claude Coats? And that was, you know, the beginning of it. And he was like, yes. And, you know, and I introduced myself, and I moved the animation department. We just moved in across the street. And oh yeah. And, you know, just like, you know, he was aware of it. And, you know, this, the pleasantries of just, you know, meeting somebody for the first time and starting to chat a little bit, you know?
Right.
So, and then really it was over a period of time that, you know, when I would see him, I said, you know, hey, Claude, do you have a few minutes? You know, let's sit. And, you know, and I'd ask him questions about Pinocchio, because, you know, Pinocchio to me is sort of the pinnacle of the Disney canon of animated features, you know, in my mind. You know, that to me, I love that movie from the artistic standpoint of, you know, what they were able to accomplish without you know, computer technology, you know, what they were able to do with analog, if you will, in their day. And it's really incredibly impressive.
Yeah, it is the gold standard for sure. One of the fascinating things also that Claude worked on that you talk about in the book, Dave, is obviously the 64-65 World's Fair.
Yeah.
And the kind of impact that had on Imagineering and themed entertainment in general. So I was wondering if you could both talk a little bit about sort of what that meant for Disney and Imagineering.
Well, you know, one of the things that I think is so great about the 64-65 World's Fair was that they it's a great example of how Walt and the company could repurpose ideas.
Right.
And you know, Alan knows this. His father, actually, this was a surprise, I think, to Alan, because this was Bob Gurr telling us about the fact that Claude had developed the revolving theater that would become the carousel. You know, the GE carousel, right? So he came up with this idea that you would move the audience around a central stage. You know, the stage would remain static and the audience would move around it. And he had developed that for what was going to be called Science Land, which was this, you know, other land that was going to be built off of Tomorrowland early on. And there was another one, Edison Square. So they were developing all these different ideas, and none of that stuff went anywhere. But then when GE came and said, you know, we want, you know, came to Disney and said, we want you to do our pavilion for the World's Fair. Somebody said, hey, let's get Claude's revolving theater. And that became the GE carousel. Right. And so that went in at the World's Fair. And then after the World's Fair, it was just, you know, it was taken apart and brought back and installed at Disneyland.
Right.
You know,
and he worked on the Grand Canyon diorama as well.
Yeah.
Right. Which was that came from the World's Fair as well, right?
Well, it was actually the Primeval.
Right.
The Primeval World diorama. That was part of the Ford Magic Skyway.
That's right.
Right at the Ford Pavilion, and they had originally thought that they were going to bring the entire Magic Skyway back to Disneyland. But Alan, you know more about that. It didn't really fly because they would have to replace the cars every model year and all of that, right?
Right. Yeah, it was just it was too difficult to transfer that entire very large. That was the largest pavilion at the World's Fair, and there really wasn't room to squeeze it into Disneyland. So they took the best part, the dinosaurs, and made the Primeval World diorama from that part of the Magic Skyway show.
Yeah, and at the Ford Magic Skyway, just for the audience, the ride vehicles were convertible Fords. That you would get into this Ford automobile, close the door. It was like, it was a convertible. I think they had Mustang convertibles, and they had sedan, the larger sedan convertibles, and you would go through this whole attraction, which would take you through the primeval world and into the future and all this stuff. But the primeval world section in the Ford Magic Skyway also had cavemen, inventing the wheel and that kind of stuff. And Walt never really liked the cavemen, so that was all dropped. And it was really just these dinosaur tableaus that were transferred back to Disneyland, and they created that primeval world diorama.
And obviously the other big thing we got from the Ford Magic Skyway was the OmniMover ride system, which Claude would, use to great effect in a little ride called the Haunted Mansion, amongst others. Was Adventures Through Inner Space was that an OmniMover as well?
That Adventure Through Inner Space, which opened in the new Tomorrowland in 1967, that was the first attraction to use the OmniMover ride system
in the park, right?
And the
park, or anywhere. No, Drew, actually from the World's Fair was the People Mover system that came to Disneyland, which was developed to run those Ford car convertibles through the Ford Pavilion.
Right.
But the OmniMover was specifically created for Disneyland for the trip through the molecular world to the nucleus of the atom. That was really a cool show.
Yeah.
And that was, by the way, Bob Gurr told us that was inspired by other attractions at the World's Fair that Disney didn't design.
Yes.
So, but they drew inspiration off. I think it was the General Motors exhibit.
And you talk about how that ride, Adventure Through Inner Space, which is no longer there. Unfortunately, it's where Star Tours is today, right? Mostly.
Yes.
But that really sort of showcased Claude's ability with design and sort of negative space, because there wasn't really a lot of stuff that was actually in there, right? I never got to ride it, but it was sort of there were a lot of tricks being used and forced perspective, but that it really showed Claude's creativity and sort of artistry in a really interesting way.
When you compare Adventures in Inner Space and Pirates of the Caribbean, because he did both of them, Pirates of the Caribbean has like 60 audio animatronics. I mean, it's just incredibly detailed, immersive environment. And then when you go to Adventures in Inner Space, it's like minimalism.
Right.
It's like the most minimal you can imagine. There's like hints of molecules, and they relied heavily on lighting. It was very dark in there. The running joke was that it was like the tunnel of love, for couples and people smoking pot and things like that. So
yeah, I think there have been a lot of people in Southern California who say that they were conceived. Yeah, right. Alan was not conceived in Adventures Through Inner Space, though, I imagine. Was there a project that you ran across that really seemed like his kind of white whale, the thing that he never got to build, that he always really wanted to, or did he seem pretty fulfilled with the projects that he saw to fruition?
Well, as soon as Disneyland opened to such great success, Walt got everyone going on all these different ideas, and Dad was working on all kinds of crazy things that Walt wanted to do. So I don't think he had anything that he really was sorry that didn't happen. He just worked on whatever he came up with, or Walt came up with, or somebody else suggested. And but there's no bad ideas. They were put aside and often used again later. And Dave, you could tell the story about that probably the most bizarre attraction.
The one that I thought was the most insane and surprising was the Uranium Hunt. And what the idea was, because, you know, the 50s, it was the age of the atom and, you know, space travel and nuclear energy and, you know, the threat of nuclear war and people building bomb shelters and everything. And so the idea was, and we only have some scribble sketches that he had done, but it was like there would be a field with radioactive, like low level radioactive rocks, and you would get a Geiger counter and you'd have to go out in the field and you'd be able to find these radioactive rocks. And I just thought, holy smokes, you know, can you imagine?
That would have been pretty insane.
Yeah.
Let's talk about his relationship with Walt for a minute. I think that obviously is what helped, you know, manifest Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion into these two classics, right? They were attractions that Walt had initially conceived of and not been around to sort of see open. So I was wondering if you could speak to his relationship with Walt and then the sort of implementation of these projects. I mean, and also later Walt Disney World that he was not around for.
Yeah, but just realize, I want Alan to speak to this, but just realize Pirates of the Caribbean, Walt was involved with really pretty much almost to the end. You know, he passed away in December of '66. The attraction opened, I think it was April of '67. Alan, is that right?
March of '67.
March. I always say April. It's March of '67. So it was nearly complete.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So.
But
Alan, go ahead. You speak to Claude's relationship with Walt, especially during that particular attraction.
Well, yes, I can talk about that. But of course, he had worked with Walt, as you said, for 20 years, from animation before Snow White, the Old Mill, and all these incredible short subjects, and then all of the features. So he worked closely with Walt on all of the animation that was translated into the design for the Disneyland attractions and other theme parks to follow. But particularly in the Haunted Mansion, it has a rather touching conclusion with Walt, because Walt had come down to see the attraction. It wasn't quite completed, but he was up in the gallery above the entrance, which was going to be his apartment and later became the Disney Gallery. Now it's the Princess Suite, right? But Walt said, Claude, I can't make it through down there. He was only going to live another month. And so he said, you go for me. And Dad said, okay, Walt. And Dad became Walt Disney's eyes and ears to have to tell him that, well, the news was good. Yes, it's coming along the way we wanted it to be. I think you'd be entirely pleased with what you see, Walt. And so it was difficult for my father to have to do that, to take that responsibility, but he did it. And he was, so Walt, the last Walt saw in his mind of the Pirates of the Caribbean was what my father described to him.
wow, that is really amazing. The Haunted Mansion opened a few years later. It opened in '69, right?
The Haunted Mansion opened on August 9th, 1969.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. So that is an attraction that has been written about endlessly and talked about endlessly, and it seemingly has many fathers, right? And people talk about what X's contributions were and Mark Davis's contributions, but could you both speak to what Claude contributed to the Haunted Mansion?
Well,
Well, I'm going to say that the Haunted Mansion really is a reflection of Claude Coats and Mark Davis.
Okay.
Claude wanted it to be more on the scary, spooky side. Mark wanted it to be more comical. They got both of those into the attraction.
Right.
Because when you go into the mansion, it is kind of spooky and scary in parts, until you get towards the end and go into the graveyard, and then you have this big party going on in the graveyard, to the chagrin of the caretaker and his dog shaking away, and you got the hitchhiking ghosts and the singing heads and all of that kind of stuff. So I think there was, over the years, a lot of misinformation passed around in the fandom world about Claude and Mark not getting along, or being enemies, or of some sort, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. And we debunked that in the Haunted Mansion chapter, because both Claude and Evelyn, his wife, Alan's mother, and Mark and Alice Davis were friends. They went to dinner parties together. They traveled together. And what we've emphasized in a lot of these interviews is that when you get all these artists together, each individual artist has their own sensibilities. I like this. Your friend who's an artist may like something a little different, and really, when you're working as a team on these projects, you have to distill all that down to the common ground. And you have to, in the writing world, there's an expression: you have to kill your darlings. The things you're in love with, sometimes you have to kill them, and go with something different. And ultimately, I think when you look at the Haunted Mansion, you've got a magnificent immersive attraction that is the culmination of a lot of different ideas over a long period of time. That attraction, the shell of the attraction, the mansion itself, had been built years and years before the attraction actually opened. As far back, I think, as 61? Is that right?
61 was
Alan?
when they were handing out the pamphlets, right?
Yeah.
The mansion building was completed in 63, I believe.
Yeah, but as early as 61, they were handing out the pamphlets about it.
Yes.
So
Right.
So you got almost a decade, really, when you think about it. It's close to a decade of it going through various iterations. And that's the great thing about, Disney, whether it's an animated film or a theme park attraction, is that, they're constantly putting up the boards, your storyboards, or your ideas, and tearing down and putting up, and tearing down and putting up, because what you're doing is you're distilling it down to some of the best that it can be, and you want to create something that's going to be timeless.
Yeah, and that creative push and pull kind of it makes the Haunted Mansion special. It's the thing that kind of gives it its identity ultimately.
Yeah. And it's not like a fun house, it's
Right.
not like going to a carnival and going through a fun house with, distortion mirrors and things popping out of doorways, screaming at you and things like that.
Right.
It's not that. There's a story to it,
Did Claude seem surprised, even, these things that he had done for the World's Fair sort of outliving their 2-year, expiration date and going on to, decades and decades of success? Did he ever seem surprised by that?
I wouldn't say he seemed surprised by it. No.
Okay.
I think he realized that, there's certain elements. We didn't mention It's a Small World too, which came from
of
the
course.
World's Fair.
Yeah.
And
Mr. Lincoln.
Yeah.
And Mr. Lincoln, right, of course. And so audio animatronics were a big benefit coming back to Disneyland from the World's Fair. That would be the first animatronic figure, Lincoln. That was a great, when I saw that at the State of Illinois Pavilion, it was really amazing. It was incredible to see this man stand up and deliver a speech. It was really great. So that technology came back to Disneyland, and the Carousel of Progress in the Small World, and the Primeval World, right, Dave? They all came back.
Correct.
And the People Mover System. These elements all came back from the fair, and Dad was cool with that. I'm sure that was good. That worked.
Well, one of the amazing things that you really get an appreciation of while reading the book is just how many different types of attractions Claude was responsible for. You know, it wasn't just a single type of attraction. And I think that maybe the submarine voyage is a great example of that. And there are some amazing photos in the book, which I don't know who found these, but of Claude sort of, you know, waist deep in a pool with a mermaid under his arm. But can you speak a little bit to the creation of that attraction?
Well,
well, you know, that's an example of an attraction that went through a number of iterations, right, Alan? Because
sure,
the Claude was originally working on, you know, the Lost City of Atlantis as the theme, but then they shifted gears when General Dynamics came on board, because General Dynamics was the company that built the nuclear submarines that went underneath the polar ice caps. You know, and so that was huge news in the 50s, and so the storyline changed quickly there. Alan?
Yes. It originally there wasn't. It was a series of tableaus underwater, and there really wasn't a story. And then Dad had read that, oh, we've just gone under the North Pole in a nuclear submarine. That's our key story point. That we're going this. The General Dynamics is going to take us under the polar ice cap, which is what happened. But something always goes wrong, right?
Right. And
the submarine ends up going deeper than man has ever gone before, down into this world of these luminescent creatures. And they do come across the city of Atlantis too, you know, where it's gone down. So you know, that something led, it's always telling the story that's so important. It keeps people focused to what they're enjoying. So that's kind of the way that developed, as far as Dad as a storysmith was what he was on that one.
One of my favorite illustrations in the book is that kind of cutaway that he had painted of the whole track of where it was going, and you see it sort of inside the show building, and it's absolutely dynamic. And of course you say, oh, you know, obviously the genius that did the backgrounds and sets in Pinocchio were responsible for this.
No. I think you're talking about, hold on a second.
Did he do, was it Alice in Wonderland?
No, it's that was the map that was painted by Chris Merritt.
Oh, Chris Merritt. Okay.
Of the Sub Voyage, yeah, and we licensed that from Chris.
Oh, you licensed that?
Yeah, to use.
Forget it. Claude had no talent. I take everything back.
But it was a great painting, because it gives the reader a view of the entire attraction.
Right.
You know, sort of this bird's eye view.
Well, Alan, can you talk about what it was like working with him? Because your story, I think, is just as amazing. And I already threatened to throw you under the bus and give you a lot of praise during this chat too. But you were a Jungle Cruise skipper. You worked in the model shop, right, at WDI.
Alligator Al.
Yes, right. Alligator Al. That was my first great job at Disneyland. I shot a lot of hippos going through the jungle. You can't do that anymore, which is a good thing. And then I did segue to Imagineering, or to WED at the time. Imagineering wasn't even a term we used back then. And I started in the model shop, and then I started working with Yale Gracie, the great Illusioneer, who created all those illusions in the Haunted Mansion and the Burning City and the Pirates of the Caribbean. And I worked with him and learned show lighting design and special effects and illusions. So that's that. But I didn't actually work so directly with my father. Like I said before, it was a team, and we'd pass in the hall, and Dad wasn't looking over my shoulder. And if I needed his advice, I'd ask him, and or I, we'd all work together.
But you were part of the team. You were both part of the team that was bringing Walt Disney World to life 50 years ago.
Yes.
Which is amazing. That is like the ultimate sort of Walt Disney project that he didn't get to see through. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like mounting that?
Well, that was probably the greatest creative time of my life, that year of 1971.
Okay.
That I spent in Florida and during the construction of Walt Disney World, the Magic Kingdom as it's called now, and seeing it become to life and the shows were being installed then, shipped from California and put together in Florida as soon as they arrived in the big show buildings and other attractions. And then there was just the four of us that did all of the show lighting. That it was huge. It was huge. It was we were tired all the time.
That's what he remembers most from 1971. I was tired all the time.
It's understandable. Can you talk a little, because you both also worked on Epcot too, right?
I worked on quite a bit on Epcot, yeah, with Marty Sklar. I was in what was called show development group, and okay. I wasn't so much. I wasn't in the model shop so much or on site. I was in front of a typewriter. I was coming up with concepts and scripts and outlines for Epcot, for the Future World pavilions, and for the World Showcase.
Okay.
And,
I've got a couple of photos I can put up if you'd like.
Put them up.
Let me see here. I'm gonna put up. I have a picture of Claude and a group of people. This wasn't in the book, but I want to share it with you guys.
Oh yeah, give us the good stuff.
Can you see this? So this is Claude right here in the blue shirt in the middle. Can you see this image?
Oh yes.
Right. So that's Claude, and the gentleman right here with the yellowish shirt on is Exitencio.
Wow.
And they're working. If you could see the sign over here, the Venezuela, they were planning on a Venezuela World Showcase.
That showcase that we always love to go to today at Walt Disney. Wait a minute.
Yeah, so it was one of the World Showcases, that didn't get made. But can you imagine if it had? Then there might have been rioting at that or something today.
And we see Tony Baxter, the young man there on the left.
Right here, if you can see. Are you seeing my cursor?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
good.
And
so that's Tony sitting here.
Dad was his mentor, and Tony went on to become the star of the second generation of Imagineers in the 70s and 80s, and created the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad and Indiana Jones and Splash Mountain and some pretty incredible attractions.
Imagine the first version of Imagination, right? So what you want to tell us about the Venezuela Pavilion, Alan? What was it? What was it all about?
I actually jump-started that pavilion. I did the initial research on it and had meetings with people from we wanted to have at least one country and maybe two from South America. So we were talking to Venezuela and Brazil. Unfortunately, it never happened, but we came close. In fact, Gordon Cooper has said, the astronaut who was working at WED, and he was in charge of that, one of the people in charge of that project, and he had said publicly that we're just about ready. We've got that well underway, and Venezuela's on board, but something happened. I wasn't privy to the politics of what it was. Maybe it was the oil crisis we had at that time, or whatever.
A coup d'etat. Maybe there was a coup d'etat or something.
Something happened. It was all, I think, in good faith, but that one didn't happen. But I was very active in trying to get that to come to fruition, and it just didn't happen.
Well, one of the other great things about the book is it goes into some sort of off Disney topics about your father's life and his artistic pursuits and these amazing paintings he did in Japan. And the back half of the book has an amazing portfolio of his personal work. And I was wondering how important was that to you in telling your father's story? And Dave, for you, how important was it to include that stuff?
Well, you know, it's interesting. You mentioned Japan. There is a chapter on Claude going to Japan, not really for Disney, but for the United States Air Force.
Yes.
And Alan and I had a conversation about this because I think there was some hesitancy for Alan initially of wanting to put that in there because he felt like, well, it doesn't really have anything to do with Disneyland. But as an artist who worked at the company, I felt as though it was important because, you know, we all as artists have these experiences that we carry with us, you know, and so the fact that Claude, you know, went to Japan, and then we have another chapter on a NASA trip that Walt and Roy took, you know, Claude and John Hench and Ken Anderson and not Ken Anderson, Ken O'Connor, and a bunch of other folks from Imagineering. They took them on a sort of a tour of the NASA program from Rocket City, Alabama to Houston to Cape Canaveral. And so you sit there and go, well, what does that have to do with Disneyland? Well, eventually it did have an impact on aspects of Tomorrowland. Because again, as an artist, you have these experiences that may not directly relate to a particular project right now, but down the line, it probably will.
Right. Well, I wanted to bring up the NASA chapter because Ward Kimball has told this story for many years. And Alan, I wanted you to officially debunk or reinforce this. Dave already knows where I'm going with this, but Ward tells a story that NASA had come to Disney to sort of introduce the idea to the American people that extraterrestrials were real. Did you ever hear anything about this? Was this ever discussed? I mean, he was hanging out with Wernher von Braun. If anybody would know, it's him. What do you say? Weigh in on
that sounds that sounds like something Ward Kimball would say.
No,
I think
no confirmation.
People took him. I think he was kidding, and people took him seriously.
Well, he would tell it at like UFO conventions and stuff for many, many years after the fact. What is Dave? You want to weigh in on this?
You know, listen, I can't, you know, either confirm it or not. Honestly, I've not come across anything in the research that I've done that would say that was true.
Okay.
I know that in the 50s when Walt you know, first reached out and you know, talked with Wernher von Braun, it was about consulting on these, you know, space travel, man in space projects, the 3 films they did during the 50s. And you know, that was all about getting some of those rocket scientists on board as consultants to kind of give their best guess, if you will, or, you know, their view of what the future was like for space travel.
Right.
And I think the trip that they did in 65 to NASA was Wernher von Braun's attempt to try and jumpstart that a little bit more and have Disney do another project to help bolster the U.S. space program.
Right.
You know, and so, you know, again, nothing I've come across would suggest that it had anything to do with, you know, gently breaking the idea that aliens existed to the American people, you know.
But what a story. What a story.
It is a great story. But, you know, having met Ward Kimball a few times, and I didn't really know him very well, but I had met him. He really was the type of guy that would quip things. You know, he just sort of off the cuff make these jokey comments that, you know, with a smile that would make you laugh. And, you know, I can see how something like that would spin into, you know, urban legends.
Right. Was was it a difficult decision for both of you to in terms of where you wanted to end the book? Because obviously, as we've said, this could have been a 5-volume kind of history.
It wasn't for me, because I think after we had all these discussions about focusing on that first 15 years, and really that's sort of the seminal period of growth for Disneyland, in the early years. Once we settled on that, it was pretty easy, because the opening chapter really gives the background on Claude, where he came from, his education, and we kind of skim across that 20 years working at the studio in animation, and then get into the nitty-gritty of Disneyland for the remainder of the book. But we do have the epilogue that touches briefly on the fact that that wasn't the end of his career. He did all this stuff at Walt Disney World and Paris and Tokyo, and talk about his mentorship and everything. So I think we kind of end it with a little tease that there's a lot more to talk about.
Could we be looking at a volume 2 at some point?
It's very possible. I mean, it's very possible. I certainly would love to do a little bit more in depth on the latter part of his career. And the interesting thing was that Tony Baxter really was mentored by Claude.
Right.
And there's a great story early on where Tony's working at Disneyland scooping ice cream, and takes a break and sneaks down to get a sneak peek at the Pirates ride before it's open. And that's the first time he meets Claude. And Claude spends about an hour giving him a tour of this ride, this attraction under construction. And then years later, he becomes a mentor to Claude. And then all of a sudden, Tony is put in charge of Paris Disneyland, and Claude then is working not for Tony, but is he's working on the hotel. I think I have a picture of the hotel here. Claude, let me share this. Hold on a second. Claude worked on this while Tony was basically in charge of Paris.
Yes.
At the time, Euro Disneyland. If you can see this, Claude worked on this hotel.
Beautiful.
So I think it's it's just really there's a lot more depth to discuss about Claude, and that after Disneyland and going into Walt Disney World, there's a lot that we can talk about as far as him mentoring people, not just Tony, but other people.
And kind of standardizing what Imagineering was to a degree. Right? I think that's one of the really interesting things in the Imagineering story, which I'm sure everybody on this call has watched on Disney Plus. But the idea that there weren't sort of standardized blueprints about how to put these things together until Tokyo Disneyland, until they had to ship it off. And I'm sure Claude was intimately involved in that kind of stuff, right?
Right. You make it up as you go, as Indiana Jones said, right? I mean, they were creating something entirely new. In fact, Dad said, "What? We weren't really sure what Walt had in mind about what was going on down in Anaheim, what he really had, what his vision really was." But soon they started to get it and understand, oh yeah, this is going to be great.
Well, was there anything that you read or anything that Dave came across, Alan, that sort of gave you better insight, or was the story that you had never heard from your father's life while putting this together?
Well, we worked together, as we said, for several years. I don't think Dave dropped any bombshells on me that I wasn't aware of. I think we had a pretty good relationship on telling the story, and I can't really think of anything that because I'd spent quite a few years there and understood what we were doing and talking about, and so I think I was pretty comfortable with everything.
Yeah. it's just an interesting opportunity to kind of see your father in a different way, I guess, by those who he interacted with or mentored or whatever, something that we don't all get if our father is a longshoreman or something. So yes, I can only imagine. Sort of, it's an interesting kind of perspective. Before we get into questions from people, I just want to remind everybody about Dave's other book that is 3D Disneyland Like You've Never Seen It Before, which is, I think, would also make just a wonderful Christmas gift or Hanukkah present. Wouldn't you both agree on that? I think so. And also, if you want even more Dave Bosset stories, Skull Rock podcast, is that every week, Dave?
Yeah, we've actually, you know, as crazy as it is, we're doing a show a week. I was going to actually share an image for you guys. There's the 3D Disneyland book, and I've got a book open to the page of Walt dedicating Fantasyland. And if you haven't seen Walt Disney in 3D at opening day at Disneyland, this is your chance.
Amazing.
And by the way, the book does come with 3D glasses, those 3D glasses that are sitting there.
I love it. And Alan, you wanted me to remind people to go to claudecoats.com, where you can actually order prints of some of his jicleys, right? Of some of his work, right?
Yes, that's correct. You can. There's quite an art gallery in there, and filmography and imaginography too, about his theme park attractions that he's done.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because there isn't really kind of a database like, you know, an IMDb or something for Imagineers. So I think that is super helpful for anybody who's learning about it, writing about it, or interested in the subject. And Dave, I am still waiting for my invitation to go on Skull Rock podcast. Anyway, we won't get into that now. Let us take questions.
I was gonna just put up one more slide.
Oh, do it.
There, can you see that?
Oh, yes.
I want to let people know that they can go to my website. There's a tab on articles. I've got about 60 articles on different aspects of animation and film and you know, various bits of history of Disney. That's all free content that people can read if they want to. And if you want to follow me on any of the social media platforms, I'm there too.
And Dave, you're putting out new articles too pretty regularly, right?
I've been trying to write at least one a month for cartoon research.
Okay.
And then those ultimately make their way onto my website. So it's sort of an archive of a lot of those articles. But there's I wrote an article for the Ford Museum magazine, and you know, some of that stuff is up. There was an article for the Ephemera Society of America's Journal. So just sort of an eclectic group of articles, a lot of different topics. And
you've got some more 3D books coming out too, right?
Yes, absolutely. We've got a 3D National Parks book coming out at the end of next year, and then a 3D World War I book coming out in 2023.
Great.
Yeah.
Yes, Dave is amazing and has incredibly long and varied history, and that picture of those books looks like my bookshelf right here to the right. So I recommend all of those wonderful books. So Ben, if anybody has any questions, we would love to hear from you. And
by the way, questions about anything, you know, it doesn't have to be about the Claude Coats book, right?
Dave doesn't get out much, and he is just happy to talk to people. That tells you how much we're on Zoom together. He just wants to talk. But yeah, if you have any questions for either of these amazing people, please speak up. Okay, this is from Phil K. So what kind of personal art projects did Claude undertake outside work hours? Well, you're going to learn a lot about this in the book, but go ahead, guys, and talk about it.
Yeah.
Alan, you go ahead.
Yes, Dad was a world traveler. He actually went to all 7 continents eventually. And so that inspired later in his life so much of his personal art in acrylic and mixed media. But in the book, we actually show some of his original artwork from there he is in his home studio working on there's Machu Picchu, Peru in the background. But,
And that's one of the paintings that's in the gallery at the back of the book.
Yes, we have a gallery, and that's quite a spectacular painting. But he was painting early on with, he was part of the California style of plein air painting in the 30s. And he had gone to Chouinard Art Institute, and he received a degree in fine arts from USC. So some of his early watercolor work is in the book. And then his gouache work that he developed during the making of Pinocchio. He was in the forefront of using what he called opaque watercolor. This is one of his early watercolors from 1934, actually, in watercolor. And then later, he got into other medium. So we show that at the back of the book.
And I think what's really beautiful about that gallery, and just so everybody understands, we always intended to have a gallery of his personal work at the back of this book. That was always sort of like from day one, that was like, we're doing that. And it was really a matter of how many paintings we could show. But what we do give is a really nice arc of his work from the early 1930s through like the 1980s. And you can see how his style shifts and changes and the mediums change and all of that.
Donna, who is up at the top of the screen here, are you both planning to do any panel discussions after this? I can tell you that they've already done a lot of talks together, so Google them together, and you've been on a number of podcasts.
Yeah, including the Skull Rock podcast.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I imagine the conversations will continue as the book rolls out, and I would not be surprised to see both of them at D23 next year, I'm assuming.
Who knows?
Who knows? Okay. Dave could.
I don't know, because we didn't do the book with Disney, they may not want to have us. So I don't know.
So we've got another question from Phil, who asks, so Alan, you said you didn't work that closely with your father at Disney. We were wondering who Alan's Disney mentors were. Well, one of them was Yale Gracie, obviously. Yes. And who else did you work under, Alan, at Walt Disney Imagineering?
There was Yale and Bud Martin, who was a very good electrical lighting person. He was on the team that I was with in Florida. Let's see, and I mentioned Marty Sklar. I worked very closely with Marty. He was really the head of WED. Marty and John Hinch back in those days. I worked closely with Marty, particularly on the development of Tokyo Disneyland and interfacing with Oriental Land Company and doing the first presentation that we made to them in September 1975 to develop Tokyo Disneyland. So I was very close to Marty, and Ward Kimball gave me rides on his train that he had, his big steam train, full size. He'd fire it up twice a year and run it all the way down his property out to the street and then back it up again. It was really a lot of fun. So, I mean, I grew up with all of these people, the 9 old men and Uncle Walt and Roy and everyone. So
wow,
I was gonna interject.
I was a lucky kid.
I was gonna interject that Marty Sklar gave us what we believe was the last interview he did before he passed away.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that's amazing.
And
I also love that footage.
And we spent a couple hours with him. It was all about Claude. Wow. We literally were up. Alan and I both went up to Marty's house and sat with him and just peppered him with questions and recorded the whole thing.
That's amazing. Ben from Gallery Nucleus, who you both might know, said, "What did Claude do on Fantasia?" I think I know the answer to this, and I'm going to tell you what I think it was. And which sections of the film. It was Sorcerer's Apprentice and Pastoral Symphony, correct? Or no? Am I right? So I get the Alan Coats thumbs up. Okay, do you want to talk about what it was like working on Fantasia for him?
What was it like working on Fantasia?
Yeah, for him. Did he talk about it?
I could tell you what it was like working on the Fantasia attraction in the 50s, but I wasn't around when he was working on Fantasia in 1940. So I
No,
can't tell you.
I assume that he would have talked to you about it at some point, but maybe
Come
not.
on, Drew.
Okay, listen.
Old.
If I did something that great, I would be talking about it every day. I'm sorry, Alan, but he did work on Sorcerer's Apprentice and Pastoral
Yes, he
Symphony.
did. Those were the
Okay.
two sections he worked on, and maybe other ones too, but those were the two. But he was a modest guy. Dad didn't say, oh, gee, didn't I do great work? He never said that. So he wasn't tooting his horn. So he did a lot of stuff that I didn't know about.
Yeah,
Wow.
that was sort of the tough part about doing research on him, was that there wasn't a lot of interviews, you know, like there were with some of the other, you know, like Nine Old Men or Key Imagineers. Claude always viewed himself as a team player, as part of a team, and he was never stepping out into the limelight to talk about himself like some others did.
Right.
And he was a very humble guy, and you know, that's just who he was. You know, there was others that other, you know, his colleagues who were, you know, more out in front and gregarious and, you know, much more talky and tooting their own horns. He just wasn't that person.
Right. Let's see. We've got another one from Ben. Hopefully, I will not answer this one. What are some attractions aside from pirates that Disney should never get rid of? That's a weird question, Ben, but we'll post it here. What do you think? I guess things that Claude worked on, or
well, no, not
rides in general.
necessarily bad. I think, you know, there's iconic attractions like Pirates of the Caribbean, Haunted Mansion. I think those original attractions, Toad, Peter Pan, Snow White, those dark rides that are in Fantasyland, those to me are all, you know, really iconic attractions. And by the way, the Toad attraction in particular, they can't really do much in there. If they
Right.
did, because that ride, some of the things they do in that ride, they can't do today, because of building codes and safety and all of these kinds of things. That's kind of grandfathered in, so there's only so much they can do in that attraction before they would have to rip it out and redo it to today's code.
I'll tell you an attraction that Claude worked on that, Alan, I think you worked on too, that's gone, that I missed terribly at Epcot, is Horizons. And I was wondering if there were any Horizons stories that you wanted to share. Well,
Horizons was a look at right now. Dad in the 80s was working on Horizons at about the early mid 21st century, right? So, and he said working on that pavilion was like going to school all over again. So
really,
yes, that's what he said. He really did a lot of research on it, and he worked with Tony and many of the second generation Imagineers to create that attraction, that look of the future. And I think he did some of the big backing scenes in that attraction. And I think it's some of the best background work he ever did. These beautiful visions of the future.
Right.
It was maybe a little bit nicer than it turned out to be. Okay.
Right. And it was sort of a follow-up in a way to Carousel of Progress too. There's actually some like direct, I won't get into it now because it's far too weird, but there are like, you know, some direct kind of carryover stuff from Carousel, which I'm sure delighted him too.
Well, ideas carry over, sure. They don't go away. And he would go back to an older show and plus it, as Walt said, let's plus it and make it better and make it different and make it new. And so that's what he was doing, developing further older ideas very often.
Amazing. Also amazing that, you know, the carousel technology is sort of the bedrock for the brand new Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run. it's sort of the same idea. It's, there are carousels, you go in and there's a carousel, and it's really fascinating that they've carried on that technology that he developed.
Actually, it's the simulator technology that's still.
Well, but if you look at the way that you kind of go in and that you leave at different times, it's like six big sort of, carousels behind each door. Anyway, we have a question from Phil that Alan and Dave can answer. Did Claude ever miss or wish to return to Disney animation following WED?
Well, I can
never want to go back. Okay.
He told me after I finished Lady and the Tramp, he said, I didn't want to go back to doing backgrounds or styling anymore. I had done that for 20 years. I was ready to move on. The timing was perfect because in 1955, when he finished Lady, Walt said, hey, Claude, you can think in dimension. I need you to help me finish Fantasyland. So Mr. Toad's Wild Ride needs to be finished. You do it. And Dad was going, yes. The timing was just great. So he would not have gone back to animation. I mean, that's a lonely job, really.
Right.
And he didn't want to do that anymore. So he went on into other things. Perfect timing.
This question is from Celine, who's asking Alan, what was it like growing up with Walt and the 9 Old Men? Did you always know that you wanted to be an Imagineer?
Growing up was wonderful because I grew up at the studio. So I got to play there and watch animation being created and live action too, and get to meet the Musketeers and Davy Crockett and Zorro. I mean, it was really great to do that. And Uncle Walt was there, of course, and he put on the greatest Christmas party in the studio theater every year. We just waited for that. But I wanted to be a movie director, live action, because I couldn't draw very well, so I wasn't going to go into animation. And so when I watched them make 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, that was just so great to see that scene with the giant squid and they're fighting that thing, and that was fantastic to watch that. So that's what I think about growing up, was watching the live action directors film the scenes. And I remember one more thing. I watched the final scene in the first 3 Davy Crockett's. The last one, Davy Crockett at the Alamo. At the very end, when the soldiers were scaling the walls and Davy Crockett was swinging his old Betsy rifle back and forth, I watched them shoot that scene. So I'll always remember those moments at the studio when I watched the live action movies being made.
Dave, did you ever watch any live action movies being made at the studio when you were there?
Yeah, I did. I think one of the things when I first started working there in the early 80s, you take a break in the morning and a break in the afternoon, and I always made a loop around the studio lot. I made friends with people in some of the shops. I knew the guy that ran the staff shop where they did a lot of model making and stuff like that. And there was always something going on the sets. I remember walking through, oh gosh, what was it was a Sam, it's going to slip my mind, but I remember walking onto one of the sound stages and they had a cornfield.
Oh, wow.
And I remember walking onto the set for the original live action Frankenweenie that Tim Burton was shooting. So there was always something going on in the stages, and when they weren't filming, you could pop your head in and just be respectful of not getting in the way of anybody. But I think that's the fun part about being able to work and grow up to some degree on a studio lot. You get to see a lot of stuff,
and there was some sort of sharing of ideas occasionally too. I think we talked before about Tron and how you guys kind of got a glimpse at what they were doing with Tron, and that kind of inspired some things at feature animation, Right.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I think there was always a lot of, sort of cross-pollination that was going on, especially in those early days, because it was very welcoming. Like you could wander around and you weren't shooed away and that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a somewhat different environment with security and things like that today. But back in those days, it was a lot looser and freer, I guess.
Mhm.
So this is another question from Ben, who is asking rides or ideas Claude worked on that he wish would have been made. This is sort of circling back to my kind of like white whale question. Any interesting rejected ideas that he worked on? And I'm going to open this up to any interesting ideas that you worked on, Alan, too, that were never completed.
Well, Dad wanted to do an alien encounter attraction at Disneyland where you'd be in a ride vehicle and it was like a game almost, and you'd be shooting at aliens. It was an interactive thing, and it was the forerunner of Buzz Lightyear's laser, what's it called, laser blaster, whatever.
Yeah, Buzz Lightyear's Astro Blasters. Yeah.
And Dad had a meeting on this, and it got kind of shut down. And he said, "I think this is a great idea," And that's the one time I saw it. I happened to be at the house, and he comes back and he says, "I had a terrible meeting. They didn't go for this." And so he was really surprised that didn't fly. Later it did. So that's what happens.
They had to change your heart. They had to change your heart, and the U.S. didn't want to tell the public about aliens.
Yes, that's right. Well, Alan, was that the one? Was that the attraction that was based on the Ridley Scott Alien?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But Dad could have been influenced by anything,
Right.
There was so many. He was absorbing so much stuff that I don't know what the original concept was that brought that idea on, but he came up with that, and it eventually happened.
What year was that? Do you remember?
Oh, it was a long time ago. Gee, that must have been. Maybe the technology wasn't right. Sometimes he would push people who were in charge, and they knew that they had the bigger picture maybe than Dad did, and maybe the technology wasn't there. It would have been maybe in the early 80s.
Okay.
Sometime there, around there.
Cool.
Yeah, that would be about right.
This is a great question. I'm gonna actually jump in after you guys answer, which is I wondered if you could recommend one Disney history book besides your own that you think is essential. This is a great question. Okay, Dave is plugging his book. Besides this one, Dave. Good Lord.
I have one I'd suggest.
Yeah.
And I want to mention my mother, who started at the company several years before my father. She was in ink and paint for a long time, worked on all of before color. She started in the very early 1930s. And worked on Snow White. She was supervisor during the production of Snow White of the inking corridor, and worked on Pinocchio, and then later came back to the new studio and worked on Dumbo. So the book about ink and paint is one of my favorite books that was published by Disney. It's called Ink and Paint, The Women of Disney Animation by Mindy Johnson. And I think that is a really fine book.
Yeah. It's really a terrific book. Look, I don't think there's any one book, that you can point to.
Well, maybe a favorite of yours.
I would sit there and say The Illusion of Life by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson, which gives you a really in-depth overview of the development, the history of Disney animation, and the animation process at Disney. That's one. There's a bunch of other books out there that I think, really drill down into how the park was built, like 3 Years in Wonderland by Todd James Pierce. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Todd James Pierce, that's a really wonderful book that gives you a detailed behind the scenes history of how Disneyland developed and got open in that first year or so that the park was open. So those are that's a terrific book. It really depends on what it is you're looking for. I don't think, the only one overarching book would be Neil Gabler's Walt Disney book, which covers, you got it right there. That covers really, from Walt's perspective, his entire building of the company with his brother Roy, and all of the things he did up until he died.
Yeah, I really like the Building a Dream book that Beth Dunlop did about sort of the postmodern architecture at Disney. That's a lot of fun. I got to recommend Art of Onward by this guy, Drew Taylor. Definitely check that out. Another great Christmas gift, I would say, or Hanukkah present. But yeah, there's so many great books about the different eras at Disney too, all the way up to Disney War, which is super fascinating, which Dave is mercifully left out of that story, and up to today. But there's just so many wonderful books about every sort of facet of the company, including Dave talking about the architecture and furniture design, the sort of mid-century groundbreaking furniture design at the studio. Dave, do we have a picture of that book?
As you were talking, I was digging that out.
There we go. Ken Weber, mid-century furniture designs for the Disney studio. Really fascinating story there.
And that's both in hardcover and paperback.
What about Kindle? Do we have a Kindle edition as well?
I think there might be. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I actually do think there is.
Okay.
So and by the way, we are, or at least I'm trying to do the ebook versions of some of these books. We're gonna have an ebook version of Claude Coats. These Kindle tablets have developed so well that now they're all in color and they can accommodate the pictures that that are in the book. So there's going to be an ebook coming out shortly. I think next week. I'm not 100% sure, but I think.
Well, I wanted to. Did you guys sort of discuss how much text versus images were going to be in it? Was it always sort of? It's sort of a coffee table book, would you say? There's a lot more text than normal coffee table books.
Let me put it to you this way. It's a book that when we initially were planning it out, we said, well, let's shoot for 200 pages.
Right.
And it settled out at 264 pages. And the text, I think I said to Alan, I'm going to shoot for a 35,000 to 40,000 word text. And it's settled out at like somewhere around 49,000 words. So, I've taken the position on some of the books that I do that I think the book has to be what the book needs to be. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to shoehorn a story into somebody who's, just plugging numbers into a spreadsheet and says, oh, you only can do 196 pages and there can only be, 25 images. And, because that's what goes on a lot, and so I think the book has to be balanced with not only, compelling text, which I hope is what I'm putting out there, and the images that are supportive of the text. And I think if you strike that right balance, you're going to hit a lot of people who want to see a lot of pictures. I kind of laugh because I got an email early on from somebody who said, before I pre-order this Claude Coats book, I want to know there's going to be a lot of pictures in the book. And it's like, not the kind of comment you want to send to the writer, you know what I mean? And I just kind of smiled at that, but there is a segment of the book buying, public out there that does want to have a lot of images. And so it's really just striking a balance between the text and the images and how the book is laid out.
Right. Donna asked, who did Claude admire? I guess within the company, outside of the company, who were his heroes?
Oh, gee. Early in animation, he was very close with Gustav Tengren, who was a major influence on the look of Pinocchio, and Dad worked closely with him. So and also Albert Herder, who was, these guys came from European storybook illustration. And Herder was very good at drawing carved furniture and carved interiors. And so Dad was very influenced by that on Pinocchio. So those were two of his influences early on. But he had so many people that he worked with and admired. I'm trying to think now who he mentioned in an interview. I forget some of them who they were, but he had illustrators that he admired and writers. And David Lean was one of his favorite film directors. I remember that. And Alec Guinness, one of his favorite actors back in the 50s. So he had many favorites, of course, and influences.
Some of his paintings kind of have a Leanian kind of scope, wouldn't you say?
Yes, you got that. As a matter of fact, that's true.
Yeah. Widescreen.
Are there any pieces of Walt Disney history that either of you know of or encountered that you think still need to be written about? And Dave, are you up to the challenge? Let's go.
The answer is yes. To me, there's thousands of stories out there that have yet to really been told. And I certainly have a list of book projects that go out to 2025, 2026 so far of topics that I'm going to tackle because I'm interested in them, and because I like to work on projects that haven't been told, or stories that haven't been told, things that people haven't seen before. I always like to, especially in my books, I want to put images in that people haven't seen before.
Yeah.
Because we all know, like, all of those images that we've all seen in multiple places, multiple books, Walt in the convertible with the animated characters sitting around him, Walt on the stagecoach, I mean, there's a lot of those sort of, like, I don't want to say cliche, because they're just sort of like the same image that we keep seeing. So I really make it a point when I'm working on a book project to dig up, images and photos and things that people haven't seen before, and I think that just makes it exciting for the reader. It makes it exciting for me,
Right.
In the Claude Coats book, look at the NASA chapter. There's a whole bunch of great photos that I don't think people ever really seen before.
Yeah, I think some of those are some of the only, because there's photos of Walt too in those photos, which I think are some of the few images of him that aren't exclusively owned by the company.
There's actually tons of images.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. You just have to go look for them. Yeah.
Is the Walt Disney Family Museum doing anything for the book or a celebration of Claude's work?
Well, at the moment, Dave and I are both members. I just got my membership cards renewed, so we're on very good terms with them, and it's something we can consider in the future, approaching them about an exhibit of my father's work. That would be great.
Do you have a lot of
that idea around with other museums as well, to do a retrospective of my father's work? So it's always possible in the future that could happen.
Yeah, I think things of, we were in discussions with possibly doing something at a museum in Southern California. And, a lot of that stuff has been sort of just put on hold because of the pandemic.
Right.
So, potentially something in the future.
Yeah, I think that would be great. How much of his original artwork do you still have, Alan?
I wish I had more. So much of Dad's art is in private hands or in museums or galleries.
Okay.
That I don't have possession of. And what I do have is spread around my family. And so I don't have that much really of my
Okay.
dad's original work.
Well, I think that is it for questions. And I just want to thank our amazing guests again. Obviously, follow Dave on social media. Visit claudecoats.com and you can reach out to Alan through there. If you want to follow me, it's Drew Tailored, like a tailored shirt on Twitter. And I can't wait to hear what is coming next. I really want volume 2. I want a lot of weird stories about Epcot. Alan, please don't forget them. Write them down. Yeah, thank you guys both so much. Do you have any, sort of parting thoughts you want to share?
Well,
No, I just want to thank Ben at Nucleus Gallery for supporting the book and for having us on here. I want to thank you, Drew, for being a great moderator.
Of course.
Really appreciate it. And of course, Alan, thank you for being you and allowing me to tell your father's story.
Thanks, guys. Well, everybody enjoy the rest of your Saturday night. Please visit Gallery Nucleus if you can. It's a wonderful store. We were all reminiscing about Alhambra and how great it is. And there are a lot of great Disney art books there as well, in addition to this one. So
funny story, Drew. When I first came to California in 1980, I stayed with a friend who had an apartment in Alhambra. And I think I was there for like 2 weeks before I actually saw the San Gabriel Mountains. Because back then there was a lot of smog, like really bad smog. They've cleaned it up since then, but literally I would go out every day, and one day I went out and it was clear and I was like, oh my God, look at these mountains. So anyway.
I love Dave. I was first in Los Angeles stories because I feel like there are a lot of them and they all have a lot of great color and texture to them. So
the first time I went to Disneyland, I actually took public transportation. I took the bus and it took like 3 hours to get to Anaheim.
From Alhambra?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was crazy. Yeah. I was like, I'm never doing this again. I thought, I'll get on this bus. I'll get down to Anaheim. It'll take like an hour and a half or something. It was, I don't know. It was like 3 or 4 hours.
Alan, when was the last time you were at Disneyland? And what, let's ask this. What do you think of the current state of Imagineering?
Oh boy, it's changed so much. It's been a while since I've been to Disneyland. Certainly before the pandemic. I was there maybe a year before that began. So, and Imagineering has changed so much. I'm not that in touch with it anymore. Really, I'm remembering it through the book that we created more than anything now.
I love it. Well, thank you guys so much. And thank everybody for listening in and buying the book. I think everyone's going to lose their minds when it finally comes shortly. So thank you guys so much for having us, and good night.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.